How do you end a story? You don't want the audience to see it coming, and you don't want it to be so unpredictable that what came before feels pointless. The best stories keep you on your toes. But how do you find that sweet spot? How do you create an ending that sticks the landing? Let's talk about that. I want to talk about the 2016 movie Arrival because I think it has a fantastic ending. But first, let's talk about some of the basics of what creates a good ending to a story. What does an ending need? Simply put, the ending should resolve the main conflict, or at least part of it. Note though, when I say the main conflict, I mean the one the story is addressing, not necessarily the largest conflict. While a story may be tied to an overarching conflict, that story's plot may actually focus on the experience of a single main character. The same goes for stories taking place in the midst of some larger struggle, like most war movies. They usually aren't about who wins the war, but rather about someone's experience during it. The story's ending isn't about resolving that particular war. It's about a moment within it. It's about resolving the personal arc. The stakes don't have to be huge, and sometimes it's better to make them small. Despite that, the go-to conflict in a lot of stories is where the main characters have to stop the end of the world, which is especially common in stories with powerful characters, since they need something equally powerful to fight against. However, I think that trope has gotten a bit tired recently. People can be numb to stakes that high and unrelatable, such as something that would end the world. Focusing on smaller stories with personal stakes allows the audience to connect to the story more, and therefore, the ending. Not only do endings need to resolve a conflict, they also need to resolve that conflict in a satisfying way, which is an ambiguous concept. Satisfying is going to mean different things to different people, but put simply, satisfying is that place between obvious and unforeseeable. Like we said in the beginning, we don't want people to perfectly predict what happens, but we also don't want the ending to come out of left field.
Just like this. If something is random and unexpected, that doesn't immediately make it good. Sometimes it makes it worse, just like this segment. Who even is this lady? Get her out of here! I think Levi's building something, so I'll throw it back to him in the booth.
So we're gonna break endings into two main categories for the sake of this video: archetypal and twist. Archetypal endings tend to be a bit more predictable, while twist endings lean towards the other side of the spectrum. They both present their own issues, since archetypal endings may pull you towards being too predictable, and twists might be too unpredictable. So we want to consider this axis of how predictable your story's ending is, but there's also another axis as well. Episodic stories, like a lot of TV shows, versus serial or single arc stories like books and movies. So that's 4 categories of endings, but let's start with archetypal. Archetypal endings make up the majority of stories. Endings like this don't really surprise us though, but they do resolve the conflict in a satisfying way. For example, in a romance, we know that the main characters are going to get together in the end. These stories are predictable and kind of familiar because they work. They are time-tested ways to end a story. Archetypal endings can also sometimes differ between genres. All of this means that the audience will have expectations and will often know what's coming based on how your story begins. Writing in genre can be difficult because there is a minefield of tropes that the audience will recognize, like when the mentor dies halfway through the story. Nobody's gonna be surprised by that if they were paying attention. Tropes like this can be fun to play with, but use too many and your story won't be unique enough. Don't use enough and it can turn off your target audience for being too different from the story they were promised. If you market your story as a semi-realistic action adventure, then suddenly at the end aliens are real, that is a huge break from the genre and will turn people off. And beyond genre, there are plot archetypes which are essentially their own kind of trope. If you've ever read Save the Cat or The Hero with a Thousand Faces, then you'll be familiar with these story archetypes. I can't discuss them all in this video, but there are things you'll recognize, like Superhero, where there is a nemesis and a big problem, Or buddy love, where the main question is will they or won't they, which includes both romance and buddy cop movies. Most stories will fit into some kind of archetype, but that's not to say that there are harsh boundaries on these things. It would just be near impossible to read a story and not be able to compare its plot structure to a ton of other examples. So that means as people read your story, they're going to subconsciously or consciously start comparing it to things they've read or seen before, from genre tropes to plot archetypes. They'll make assumptions about your story based on the similarities they notice. Assumptions you need to be aware of, because whether intentional or not, these are promises you're making to your audience. I understand that it's weird to call audience assumptions promises, but that's generally how people refer to them. Brandon Sanderson says promises come in all shapes and sizes, from plot promises to tonal promises to character promises. They signal to the audience what they should expect. We kind of dangle something familiar in front of the audience and say, hey, kitty, 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 you've liked it before and you'll like it again. According to Sanderson's theory, after making promises, you need to make constant progress on that promise until you pay it off. That's how you make an engaging story, and stories can have plenty of these promises and payoffs in the form of B-plots, minor character arcs, and the like, not just the big arc. So if you start your story with an event or a character that's easy to spot, the audience will likely form expectations. Like I said, I see that wizard in Act 1 and I know he is not making it to Act 3. He's not. He's dying in the middle of Act 2. Midpoint climax, it's where it always happens. Just how it goes. Shows the story of stakes. Somebody has to die. Not gonna be me. But the thing about promises and payoff is that you don't always want the payoff to be super obvious. Like if you're doing a polished Hollywood superhero flick, then we know the heroes are going to win. That's how the archetype works. If it didn't end that way, you may be breaking a promise you made to the audience, which is generally a no-no. But how they win is what makes it interesting. If it ends up just being a big fight, that can be fun, but also kind of boring. A lot of the first and second era MCU films kind of fell victim to this, as stories often boiled down to hero versus a villain that's basically just the hero but evil, and then a big fight at the end. It can be interesting to see an inverse of the hero, but like anything else, it can also become overused. The best archetypal and genre stories find ways to subvert expectations without rejecting them altogether. So how do you do that? Well, step one is understanding audience expectations, which are gonna change based on the genre, plot, and tone. You might be able to do this by researching the trope, but I guess you wouldn't really know what to search for. I guess you could just learn every trope, but that might take too much time. Save the Cat is a great resource for learning about those archetypes though. This is one of the reasons that people often say that one of the paths to becoming a great writer is to read a lot. Reading widely makes your prose better, gives you a better feeling of how to construct a plot, and also informs you about what is already out there so you can recognize tropes. Like we talked about in our last video, having an understanding of how the audience will perceive your piece is super important. If you've read a lot of a genre, then you will have a good idea of what the audience expects from it. You see the farm boy longing for something more, then their uncle leaves the picture, that wizard shows up, someone mentions some evil growing far away, and you have half of all fantasy stories. People have a firm expectation of where that plot will go. But how do you set yourself apart and add that level of unpredictability? Some writers like to throw in a huge twist ending, which might not be the move. Sometimes that can take you from predictable to way out of left field. So how do you find the balance? Most stories are gonna have happy endings, but you need some way to give that ending weight and distinction. If the good guys just win and everything is happy peachy, that's fine, but it's not very impactful. A solid, though very general piece of advice here is that you should consider the characters' wants and needs. Endings where characters get what they want and what they need are reserved for feel-good movies, like Legally Blonde. These are a lot of fun to watch, but don't have super impactful endings. Everything turns out perfect, and that's it. You get to go home feeling nice and happy. Compare that to when the characters get neither their want nor their need. These are gonna be a bummer just about every time. The hero has essentially failed from a character standpoint, and these are generally hard to make readers like. The two endings that are typically the most interesting are endings where characters get either their want or their need, but not both. Bonus points if the character is forced to choose between the two. And that's why your characters should always have to pay the price. Everything doesn't come out peachy keen. Yeah, they might have won, but they took some blows too. They've changed forever, and nothing will ever be the same. That change can come in a lot of ways. The main character should have a personal arc that changes something about them, but often the price will be paid in other, more concrete ways. The comic relief dies for the cause. You save your people, but Asgard is destroyed. You defeated the Joker, but Harvey Dent was corrupted and you took the fall. In short, if something's too easy, it can feel unearned. Thor Ragnarok and The Dark Knight had great endings in part because the hero's victories both came with a cost. Those things add weight and can be unexpected. The audience knows that the main character is going to win, but that price can be the little twist that makes the cake so much sweeter. But it's not like a plot twist. That's kind of different, but equally as interesting, which is where Arrival comes in. It's a video about endings, so I think this kind of goes unspoken, but spoiler alert for Arrival. You can go to the timestamp on screen to skip the spoilers. Arrival has a really interesting structure when it comes to its promises, progress, and payoffs. Let's take a look at the promises it makes first. We start the film with a sad montage of Amy Adams' character Louise losing her daughter to some kind of illness. Right away, that promises some kind of reconciliation with her daughter's passing. That's a problem we'll be dealing with in this movie. Otherwise, why would they show us that? Then aliens, known as heptapods, arrive on Earth. We've seen plenty of movies where this happens, from Independence Day to District 9 to Avatar. Things tend to get hairy. We can expect some kind of conflict between the humans and aliens. Even Louise's character details make small promises, like they wouldn't make her a linguist if it wasn't important to the plot somehow. Now, they don't have to pay off every promise. Sometimes a detail is just a detail. But when they make a big stink about her being a linguist in the movie, that tells me, the audience, that it's important. I need to remember and consider it. So how does Arrival pay off these promises? With a twist. Which you knew, because it's the name of the video chapter. Twist ending. Let's get it. Throughout the movie, tensions rise around the world. Some governments interpret the aliens to be hostile, some soldiers try to blow up the aliens at the US landing site, and general chaos happens. The stakes rise as Louise gets better at communicating with the heptapods. And we're also reminded of her daughter's situation in cutaways throughout the movie that make her seem haunted by the memories. That's how Arrival progresses on the promises it made from the opening act. None of it is too unexpected. Aliens and the military usually don't mix, and we can expect Louise to be haunted by her daughter's death. At the end though, Louise discovers that learning the heptapod language has given her the ability to look forward in time and affect it. She uses this ability to peacefully prevent violence against the aliens by obtaining information from the future. I won't go into all the details, but the key is that learning the language of the heptapods help prevent some potentially very bad things from happening. We also learn, and here's the big reveal, that what we saw at the beginning of the movie with her daughter actually takes place after the events of the movie, which makes this movie great on the second watch through because it changes the impact of a lot of the scenes. But despite that, despite knowing her daughter will die a child, despite knowing it will ruin her marriage, she chooses to have the child anyway. She'd rather have her daughter and lose her than to never have her at all. She overcomes the trauma that she didn't actually have for most of the film. It just didn't quite happen in the order we expected. It's a very sweet ending and a wonderful way to humanize a science fiction film. But how does that ending pay off the promises made at the beginning? So we have the plot promise of the aliens and humans not seeing eye to eye when they make first contact. Then we have the personal arc promise about Louise and her daughter. In most stories, the purpose of an internal arc is to prepare the character for what they'll have to face. This is a part of why character want and need is so important. The thing they want is the plot, and what they need is the personal arc. So traditionally, we would expect that Louise has to come to terms with her daughter's death to gain the ability to make peace between the heptapods and humans. On the surface, that's not a great plot. Having to get over something internal to overcome something external can be weak if the two things aren't really connected. It's ideal if the personal arc is tied to the plot in a more tangible way. Luke needs to learn the Force to destroy the Death Star. The personal arc there feeds directly into the main plot. Arrival subverts this though. It promises you that formula, but then the story's ending pays off the promise in an unexpected way. That's the beauty of a plot twist that's pulled off correctly. It pays off the promise better than you expected. Compare that to when sometimes people will break a promise with a plot twist, which can undermine the rest of the story. For example, Ocean's 12 promises you a heist movie whose tension relies on the question, are they going to get the thing? But then they reveal that they already got the thing off screen earlier in the movie, and that they were just trying to trick other thieves. But since we, the audience, didn't know that, it betrays the fundamental plot promise of the genre. We don't want that. That's a bad plot twist. It seems like Louise's daughter issues and learning the alien language are disjointed, but by the end of the story, they depend on each other. Louise needs to become fully unstuck in time to come to terms with her daughter's future death, but also gets the information she wants to make peace in the present. The movie comments on suffering and what love is worth. It's a beautiful film. And it also asks questions about our relationship with language and how it shapes our brain.
If that interests you, we've partnered up with Biblaridion, whose channel is all about language building and world building. He has a new video exploring how language potentially shapes thought, so go check it out.
But remember, the key to a twist ending is that you shouldn't break the promises you made. You have to find a way to pay them off better than what the audience expected, which usually comes in the form of subverting the way you pay off the promises you make. But now, let's shift our attention away from archetypes and twists to think about the stories that may not have those things. Books and movies often have very clear story promises, but things like television or comic book series don't always have those major overarching story promises that we talked about. And it's because of this that I think you see a lot more bad TV show endings than good ones, and even more that are just okay. Why is that? Well, endings are better when they pay off a promise. That creates a feeling of finality, but not all shows have a direction to them. Some shows are just a premise to explore and don't work towards any goal. There's no plot promise made at the beginning of Parks and Rec, The Office, or most sitcoms for that matter. Same goes for plenty of cartoons like Adventure Time or Regular Show. So while it's certainly possible, it can be hard to make these end in a way that's actually satisfying. Compare that to, say, Avatar: The Last Airbender or Breaking Bad. Those shows promise you exactly where they're heading from the first couple of episodes. Aang's gotta fight the Fire Lord. Walter White's gonna get rich making meth until he croaks. And both of those shows have great finales because they deliver on those promises. A lot of times, shows without any central question fizzle out and everyone just forgets the ending, which is probably fine in a lot of cases. As long as the ending isn't bad, people will be mostly happy with it. The Sopranos doesn't promise you any kind of direction. It's just Tony Soprano doing his thing.
Woke up this morning, got some gabagoo.
And that's how the series ends. It's a little sudden,
Got some gabagoo from a Scooby-Doo.
but it's not bad. It's not good either, but at least it isn't, Game of Thrones, which I will not mention again in this video because it's too easy a target. Feel free to leave a comment detailing how it broke promises though, because boy did it. Compare that to the ending of Seinfeld, which ends with all the main characters in jail, which is funny I guess, but it also feels like a forced conclusion. Just let it end. You don't have to send all the characters that people love to jail. They tried to force a payoff that they never actually promised, and it just feels weird. There is an interesting middle ground here though. If you've read a long-running manga or watched a long-running anime, you'll be familiar with the idea of the arc. These are pseudo self-contained stories in the series that pretty much take as much time as they need to. A series like this doesn't necessarily have one big plot promise like a movie. It doesn't have plot promises so small that they only track episode to episode like a sitcom. And when it comes time for a show like this to end, the end of a large arc is a great place to do it. Will it work in elements from previous arcs? Probably. But it isn't necessarily some coming to a head that's been built up over the entire series. In American television at least, I've seen this done with final seasons of shows a couple of times. For example, Adventure Time is generally very episodic. It does have serial elements that link episodes together, and there are small arcs sometimes, but not in the same way as anime. Each episode has its own little plot, and maybe we do something a little extra special for the season finales. So what Adventure Time decided to do for its series finale was to just make it an arc. The final season of Adventure Time mainly focuses on one central conflict, the Gumball War. That way, when the arc ended in the last episode, it had a grander finale feel. It's a little clunky since it changes the nature of the show a bit, but it does make the finale feel more dramatic and earned. So when it comes to long series, there seems to be a few options for endings. Make sure the series has an overarching promise and deliver on it. Don't try to oversell the ending, be anime, or take a page from anime's playbook and turn the ending into an extended arc. But there is one last thing that I think you should consider for endings. The ability to leave your audience thinking about the ending is important, especially for a long series. This is a little bit more subjective than any actual plot structure or anything, but I love when a story doesn't end the story, you know? You finish the book and close the page, but the characters will always be there, and the ending makes a point to remind you of that. Parks and Rec does this with its flash forwards to show the characters' futures, and Adventure Time does the same thing with its final outro song, where we see just about every character we've ever seen in the series and where they end up. More important than any structure, you want the story to keep living in the mind of the audience. A movie can make you think and stick in your brain for weeks, like Arrival, or a long show can recall where it's taken you. And if you're me, watching that last episode, you remember where you were when you met those characters, the joy they brought you, and how they changed you. The adventure never ends. So while it's nice to consider plot archetypes and promises and payoffs, the best endings are the ones that stick with the audience because there's some kind of truth in them. And the only way to put your truth in your work is to explore what's in you. When you put a piece of yourself in your work, other people will recognize it and connect with it because it's in them too. So in review, endings should pay off promises you make to your audience. If you're writing an archetypal ending, then you should make the characters pay the price. That could be a physical price like a wound or loss of home, or it could be a psychological price like a changed worldview or having to step over a moral line. Something to give the success a more tangible cost and make it feel earned. If you're writing a twist ending, you should deliver on your promises, but subvert how the audience would expect you to pay them off to make your delivery so much sweeter. Consider looking at things from another point of view, or how you can hint at a secret to be revealed, which will make the audience have this moment of revelation that plot twists create so well. And if you're writing a long series that doesn't have an overarching plot promise, don't manufacture one at the last second. Either let things end without blowing it out of proportion, or make a promise late in the series, but still give it time to build to a finale. Don't just toss everyone in jail. But as always, remember there are no rules. Write what you want and have fun. Thanks for watching. Hey, there's not gonna be a regular outro for this video. Jackson's gonna tell you about his new book. Let's go!
Hello, I'm Jackson Dicker. You might know me from the podcast on this same channel. I have written a book and it's being published through Campfire Publishing, which is super exciting. It comes out June 1st and it's called The Quest for the Golden Plunger. It's a super fun novel about a bunch of Boy Scouts at summer camp, and they go through all kinds of trials and tribulations trying to earn the coveted Golden Plunger. There's also a buck with tasers mounted to its antlers. And if you can find any other book that has that, I'll give you $1. Please pre-order my book, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Pre-order my book. I hope you. You can find the pre-order, if you're interested in finding out more about this book, you can check it out on Amazon, Audible, or anywhere books are sold. You can find the pre-order link for my book down in the description below, so definitely check it out if it sounds interesting. My thighs are burning. This is a big wake-up call for me. We hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much if you decide to pre-order. We really appreciate it. I love you.
Jackson, you can't be up there.
Why?
Sewer.
I love it here. You'll float too.
Let's get down, bud.
I saw it in a movie.
The video's over, guys. Come on, bud.
No,
Okay.
I live here now. This is where I write my books. This is my writing place. Levi, I'm scared. I can't actually get down. I didn't want to admit that. Don't step in that water. I pooped in there. I think other people have too, judging by the color. Levi, we carpooled. Levi, we carpooled together. You can't go. Levi, wait. Anyway, thank you guys very much. If you do decide to pre-order, if not, you can go to hell. Just kidding. Don't put that in there.